You ready? Yay. I'm so excited. Are you glad to be here? Yeah. All right. Well, good morning, church. Good morning. If you're not awake now, I don't know what's going to do it. I don't know. I'm so glad that you guys are here. We're starting a brand new series today called Moving at the Speed of Light. And the whole point of this series, what we're going to be doing is developing an intimate relationship with Jesus. How do we do that? How do we develop the real stuff, the good stuff? I mean, the stuff you read about in the scriptures and you say, I want that. How do we do that? And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk today, we're going to spend a lot of time in an idea that comes from the disciple, the apostle John. John was one of Jesus, he was the youngest of Jesus' followers. He followed Jesus while Jesus was here on earth. He was 17 years old when he started to follow Jesus. And so he has a young mind, impressionable mind. He refers to himself, he was the young one of the group. He refers to himself in his own gospel as the beloved one. And you can kind of see what that relationship is between him and Jesus. There's that sense that this is the young kid, the whippersnapper kind of the group, the beloved one, the one that would have the most questions and probably was quiet and listened. And because of that, John got to see some things at a very young age that the world now, we look back in the stories that we read, he got to see those things and it formed the way that he thought. And so when you read John, John thinks differently than a lot of other people in the scriptures. He likes to use a lot of things that are poised against one another, a lot of object lessons, a lot of things that help us to wrap our mind around the bigness of God. So he talks about things all the time. He talks about bread and life and water and blood and all of these kinds of metaphors to come together. But one of the most popular things that he uses, something that is throughout his gospel and also the letters that he writes later on, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, something that happens throughout all of these is John refers to Jesus as the light. Jesus is the light of the world. This is something that John uses to refer to Jesus. It's something that John also records that Jesus says of himself. And so when John is writing his gospel in chapter 1, by the time you get to verse 4, there's this opening section of the scripture, the opening section of the gospel. It's called the prologue. And if you think about it in terms of Star Wars, when you're watching Star Wars, there's the really famous script that goes up through the middle. The title score is going, and it's like 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it tells you what you need to know before you can watch the movie. It says, this is what's going on, and the rebels are doing this, and the empire's doing this, and you're listening to it, and the music's booming. Before one laser blast hits, you know what's happening. Without that, lasers be going off, ships be going by, and you'd be wondering what in the world is going on. John actually writes that way for his gospel, and he has this prologue. And he says, this is the information you have to know about Jesus before you can even start to read about his birth and what he did here on earth and all of those things. So by the time you get to verse 4, this is what he says. John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. I love these statements. In him was the life, and this life that he brought, it was the light of men. In other words, here's what he's really saying. Jesus came here. We were spiritually dead. That's the opposite of life, right? Life and death. We were spiritually dead, but Jesus brought this life, and we know, what is this life? It's relationship with God. The ability to bridge the gap between where we are and where God is. Jesus came here so that we could have that relationship with him. And this is what I love about the way John uses this terminology. John says that relationship with God is like light. It's like light coming into the world. This is what it is. It's the switch gets flipped, and where there was darkness, now there is light. He goes on, John 1:9, in the same prologue, he repeats this kind of idea again. He says, there was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. He's saying, listen, this light that came into the world, this life that had light, this Jesus that actually came, when you came in contact with this Jesus, you could not remain the same. This light went places and enlightened people. It's powerful. He goes on, by the time you get to John chapter 3, he's talking about Jesus having a conversation with this man named Nicodemus. And Nicodemus is a teacher of the law. And Jesus is actually instructing him. And this word comes from Jesus, but he who practices the truth comes to the light, so that his deeds may be manifested as having been wrought or begun in God. And I picture when Jesus had that conversation with Nicodemus, he's telling him, Nicodemus is a man who has practiced the law, the good things, his entire life. He's a teacher of the law. And Jesus is trying to get him to understand that practicing good brings him closer. And I picture Jesus almost even touching his chest when he says this. If you really want to be good, you will be close to the light. Goodness should bring you close to the light, he would say, to himself. By the time you get to John chapter 9, Jesus is performing a miracle, and I love this. He's right in the middle of performing this miracle, and he stops. He has this kind of dialogue that happens in the middle, and he says, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. It's important. He's trying to connect these two ideas together. I mean, they're watching a miracle unfold in front of him. And Jesus is telling them, this thing that's happening, what you're experiencing, this is like a goosebump moment, right? If you saw Jesus doing miracles, it'd be a moment where you just had goosebumps and be like, wow, what am I seeing? Jesus is saying, this is a light moment. That's what you're experiencing right now. What you're doing, it's like light in the world. You're seeing the light of the world work. John chapter 12, verse 46, Jesus is talking. This is kind of cool because before he says this, there are leaders in a community that are believing in Jesus, but they're having a hard time being public about it because Jesus was very divisive with certain people. And so here's these leaders, and they're having a hard time doing it. So this is Jesus' encouragement to them. I have come as light into the world so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in darkness. This is so cool. He's saying, listen, there's this idea, I've come into the world. You know that I am the light. Don't remain in the darkness. Step out of it, into the light. Be vocal. I mean, that's what his instruction really is to them. Be vocal about this light. And by the time you get to his letters, he says this, but if we walk in the light as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So good. This idea of being in fellowship with the light and one another, it changes things. And what's so interesting about this, and this is just a sample of how many times John uses this throughout the gospel and throughout his letters, there are more. But what's so interesting about this is when you boil it down, when you look at them all together, Jesus uses these two concepts really in two different ways. John uses it in the same way, following after what Jesus had shown him. The first side of it is referring to relationship with him through the person of Jesus. The opposite of light means darkness, right? It means that the world was dark. With spiritually dead, there's that idea to it. Jesus comes into the world offering relationship with God. He is the light of the world. And that's one side that he uses it. The other side, there seems to be this magnetic kind of force attraction to the light. There's this sense that Jesus himself will pull you in a certain direction if you will follow after him. There's this sense that it's used that if you follow the light, your life will actually change. You will begin to do things differently. There's this connection between doing good, being good, and being close to this light. And that the closer you are to the light, the more good will actually emanate from your life. It's almost this sense that Jesus is saying that he is the instruction manual for life. He's the example for life. In other words, if you follow the light, you will be doing what is right in life. You'll be making the kinds of decisions that you should be making in life. You know, I have a nephew, and oddly enough, he turned 7 yesterday. And last year, I had the opportunity to be up there for like just the aftermath of his birthday. It was like a day afterwards. And so Uncle John comes up, and I'm bringing toys, right? I've got my birthday Santa bag, thing going on. I raided Toys R Us before and brought them up with me. And I decided to get him. I looked at all the different toys, and I reached back in my own nerdage and my own childhood. And I said, you know what I'm going to get him? I'm going to get him Star Wars Lego set. We're going to get a good one. We're going to put it together. We're going to have fun. We're going to build this thing. He just turned 7, so he was 6 last year. And I grabbed this ship set, and it says that it's for kids 8 to 12 years old. And I think, well, that's good, because I think you're supposed to buy toys that are like a couple years ahead of them. That way they kind of grow into it a little bit. It's a little challenging, whatever. So we get up there, and we have the first thing we do, because I've been hyping him all week that I'm coming with toys. And so as soon as I come in, that kid, he is ready to get some toys. And so he comes up, I pull out this thing, we have this like Star Wars dance thing that we do for a second. Oh yeah, I got this ship, and he's already got the box, and he's making ship noises with it, and we haven't even built it yet. We undo this box, we pull out, I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden I open this box, and I realize, man, this thing's like 300 or 400 pieces. I mean, this is like 8 to 12 years old, and I start to open bags, and I'm looking at the instruction manual, and I'm building this thing, and I'd like to think that I'm good at following directions and whatnot. But I got through this thing, and I was building this wing, and half the wing, I started it on the wrong row of Lego. I should have counted like the number of Legos. I just kind of looked at the picture and started from there. And so I'm building this monstrosity of a wing, and I get to the end, and I got no more rows. And in the picture, it's got like 3 more. I just don't have that. I had to take the whole thing apart and like rework it and to put it back together. And I'm thinking to myself, this is for 8 to 12-year-olds. You can read in 3 ancient languages. You can't put together this Lego thing. And he's just looking wide-eyed. He's like, is it ready yet? Is it done yet? Just a second. Uncle John's working on it, I mean, I'm trying to get this thing to come together. We ended up getting together, and it worked. That's the sense of it, I mean, put it together. I had trouble following the instructions, right? Now, Jesus is saying this. The world is dark, right? He has come into the world as light. Imagine what it would be like to build that same ship, to put together that Lego kind of thing without light. To do it in the dark. And not only that, but if we really follow what Jesus is actually tracking and thinking about it, you would not only just do it in the dark, there would be an infinite amount of Legos to choose from. And what you're hoping in the middle of this is that you reach out into the world and you grab the right Lego and you put it together with the next right Lego, and that sooner or later, the end result is what you wanted it to be. We would call a task like that impossible. We would hope that somebody would turn on the light so that we could see, and that somebody would then grab us a set of instructions so that we knew which Legos to pull, what Legos to put together, so that we knew if we started on the wrong row, what we needed to do to get it back on track. And ultimately, that's what Jesus offers us in life. He offers us that relationship, that set of instructions that will put us right on the mark. And it leaves us with this sense. By the time you get to 1 John, this is chapter 2, verses 5 and 6. It says this, "By this we will know that we are in him. The one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked." And so in other words, do we really want to know, have we really stepped into this relationship with God? How do we know that we've done that? Well, we've begun to walk as Jesus walked. We're following the light. God has given us relationship with him and the instructions. And in our own way, messing up from time to time, we've begun to follow after him. The question is really, how do we do that? How do we step into that? What do we actually do to follow? Because one thing just to talk about that, to follow, that kind of language. How do we actually step into that? What does it require? What does it require for us to do, for us to think? Where should my heart be in the middle of this? Well, there's some common ways to think about it. One of them, and this is a statement that you may know, is if it's going to be, it's up to me. You know that statement? Another way to kind of put it in a little bit more kind of Christian sense is God helps those who help themselves. You ever heard that before? As a matter of fact, this is a pretty popular one. George Barna did a study, and 8 out of 10 Americans said that they believe in the statement, God helps those who help themselves. It's a common thing. It's a common thing because we often value just the power of work. We value that. We value those who work hard. So it would seem like those who work hard would be the ones who get the results. There's a correlation between that. We can see that sometimes in the world. We value those who have high senses of ability. Wow, that person is really smart or funny or strong or looks or whatever those things. We value senses of ability. And so we think for ourselves, even in a spiritual way, that those who would work hard and that those who would have the highest ability, God helps those who help themselves. And so they have almost a leg up in this journey. The dilemma really comes when we think about this. If we really say, can we really be smart enough or strong enough to shape our own futures? Can we really be? Do we really actually have the power, or do we really actually have the intelligence to set out into the world and to shape our own future, our own even spiritual future on our own? John says this in chapter 8, verse 12. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I like this because here's what it doesn't say. I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but if they work really, really hard, if they get into it, if they step into it, if they work really hard at it, they might attain the light of life. Or does it say this? He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but if they have massive abilities, if they're smart enough, if they're clever enough, if they have enough wit, then they will have the light of life. The text doesn't say that. Here's what it says. He who follows me will not walk in darkness. There's that sense of letting go. He who follows me will not walk in darkness. You let go of the darkness, and what is God going to do? But will have the light of life. He just gives it there. It's a gift. Because at the end of the day, we can't be powerful enough to make it happen. We can't be smart enough to make it happen. You see, God gives the light to those who work hard and to those who don't work hard. God gives the light to those who are able and to those who are not able. God gives the light to the ones we put on the pedestal and the ones that we have a hard time keeping eye contact with. God gives it to everyone because we're not strong enough to obtain it on our own. It's a gift from Him. God helps those who helps themselves. The scriptures would say God helps everyone because everyone needs help. When I think about this in a practical sense, I think about the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler in Mark chapter 10, this is a story really about him. He comes up to Jesus, says, Jesus, I've listened to what you said. You are the teacher. I've done all the math. I want to follow you. Jesus looks at him, knows what's going on the inside, and says, awesome. Here's what I want you to do, though. I want you to go sell everything you have and then come follow me. The rich young ruler had a lot of possessions. He had tons of things. And so he actually leaves that conversation discouraged. What did those things bring him? Material satisfaction, there's no question about that. It also brought him power. It brought him the feeling that he could do it. I could accomplish it. I can just go in that direction. I can buy it, purchase it. I don't have to pray about it. I can make it happen. And Jesus is saying, unless you come to that point where you allow me to do it, you're going to miss something. I have to give it to you. There's another way of thinking. It's common. It says, I should follow my heart. I should just follow my heart. Your heart is what says, take a left here, take a right here, choose this thing, choose him, choose her. We say that. It comes from our heart. That's our extension of our will. And God has designed us to have that, to think, to have that sense of free will, if you will. And you know, it comes from our thoughts, our beliefs, what we believe about the world. Our beliefs affect our feelings, and then our feelings affect how we choose in the world. And the real question that it's asking then is, what do I want in life? What directions do I want to go? Where do I want to be in life? And I'm going to follow my heart to get there. The scriptures say something. Actually, the dilemma really is this: can we really be consistent enough of heart and will that we would always, in all situations, choose good then? In other words, if I trust my heart, and this is common, we tell our kids this sometimes. We raise them up, follow your heart. Just follow your heart no matter what. And the question really is, can we be consistent enough in our own judgment, in our own sense of will, that we will always, in all situations, choose what's good? Can we trust that? Because really, here's the bottom line. Would you follow a compass that was 90% accurate? Can you imagine talking to your phone, putting the directions in, or saying, hey, take me here, and all of a sudden Siri pops up on your phone, or Cortana, or whatever your phone interface is, says, hey, I've got that, your instructions are here, turn a left in 400 feet or whatever. Oh, and by the way, you have a 90% shot for every line of these instructions. Can you imagine what that would be like? You would scrap that in a second. You'd be wondering to yourself, which one? I mean, especially if that had 10 or more steps. Because, I mean, you're playing the odds again every time, but that means that by chances, one of those is going to be wrong. And you're not going to end up where you want to be. You know, as a matter of fact, there's a really hard scripture, in Jeremiah 17. This is a hard one. It says, the heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? That's a hard passage. The heart is sick. The will is sick. The bottom line, what the scripture is trying to teach us is we make decisions sometimes that we wish we didn't make. And we go in directions that we wish we didn't go. We wanted it on the front end, and then it happens, and immediately we're like, oh, that was bad. We have regrets because of that. And because of that, God is saying, you can't trust that inner voice all the time, your inner voice. You can't just trust your heart to go in that direction. As a matter of fact, there's a story of another guy. He's in Luke chapter 9. He comes up to Jesus, and I call him the funeral man. He says, Jesus, I want to follow after you. Then he says this word. He says, but I have to go home and to bury my father. But I have to go home and bury my father. And you know what? On the surface, that looks like a reasonable request. That looks like something that Jesus would have said, yeah, bury your father, I get that. You know, you need to go home and do that. But Jesus knows his heart. Jesus knows the heart of this man, and that as soon as that's done, there's going to be another but. But Jesus, now I have to go and settle these things. But Jesus, now I have to go and take care of these things. But Jesus, now I have to go in this direction and do these things. Jesus understands that that's the heart of really what's going on, that his chooser, his heart is leading him in the wrong direction. Jesus is saying, if you want to follow after me, you have to take the buts out of the equation. You have to step into it. There's a third way of thinking. If I can just find myself. If I can just find myself. In other words, if I can just discover who I really am. This is a common one. This is like in most movies, growing up stories kind of thing. This sense of self-discovery. And if somewhere I can find the real nugget of who I am deep down inside, that at the end of that journey, I will be where I want to be. I'll be the person that I want to be. The idea behind it is if I can unlock my own potentiality. The future is inside of me, and I need to find me to find it. The dilemma really is this: can I really expect at the core of me to find the answers to life? Can I really expect it on the inside that somehow grabbing a hold of me better will help me to find the answers of life? Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 10. He who has found his life will lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. It's really the opposite kind of thinking. Jesus is saying that the answers to life aren't found deep within your core. The answers are found in a person who's willing to actually let go of that and to grab on to who God is. If you will let go of you, and if you will grab on to God, you will find the life that you're looking for. There's another guy that experienced this exact moment with Jesus. I call him the party man. In Luke chapter 9, it's the story that comes right after the funeral, man. The party man comes up to Jesus and says, Jesus, I want to follow you too. But I have to go home and let everybody know that I'll be taking this journey. And if you look into that, if you look into what's really going on in that passage, what he was asking Jesus for is in order to go home and to tell his family, you know how his family would have responded? They would have thrown him a party. They would have gotten together. There would have been several days of celebration. He would have let them know really what was happening. There would have been this like commissioning celebration kind of thing. And here's what he's telling Jesus. Jesus, I want to follow after you, but I got to have this party. They're going to elevate me and talk about who I am, and they're going to show this clip about my life, and all my buddies and friends are going to be there. And after the party is done, then I will follow after you, Jesus. And of course, Jesus says it can't work that way. Why? Because he's got to let go of that. You got to let go of that and to grab onto Jesus. It's not about you, it's about God following after him. That's really the dilemma that's going on in his heart. So what's the key? We've seen there's so many common ways to think about it, ways that we naturally tend to gravitate towards. What is the key to following Jesus? What is he looking for? Jesus says that the key to following him is to have the faith of a little child. Jesus says the key to following him is to have the faith of a little child. This is a key distinction of Jesus. Jesus would walk into towns. You got to remember, children are viewed as second-rate kind of people. They're not really even like people yet. Nobody paid attention to the kids. The disciples were constantly wanting to take the kids out of the equation. Jesus was all about kids. Everywhere that he went, the kids were with him, and stop, don't pull them away, let them come close. And as a matter of fact, this is one of his greatest lessons that he leaves. He says, listen, unless you have the faith of this little child, you aren't going to get it. Because how does a little child respond to an adult? You remember that phase, maybe for your own kids, or I experienced it with my nephew Luke, where the kids come up and they think you are Superman or Superwoman. There's that sense they run in the door and you are bigger and you are smarter and you are stronger, and everything in life that they can't do for themselves, you can do that for them. And so there's this expectation. They come up and they're running and they say, help me. Do these things for me. I need you over here. There's that sense of longing and need and connection to that. That's what Jesus is talking about. There's this unabandoned with little kids and faith in that sense. And the question for us is, can we really adopt that same position with Jesus? In other words, are we willing to believe that God is big enough to change my situation? That God is powerful enough to change my situation? Do we really believe that? I mean, here's the guy that spoke the universe into existence, who wrote the laws of physics, who said it, and there was nothing, and God spoke, and now there is everything. And if he has that kind of power, does he then have the power to affect my life? Do you actually think that we can mess up so bad that this God with this much power goes, I don't know what to do? Boy, you really got yourself in a pickle. I mean, I see the rock and the hard place. I'm God, and I'm in outer space or whatever. And, there it is. No. That is not God. He's here with us going, I can totally fix that. I spoke the universe into existence. You don't think I have enough power for this? The other side of that is God smart enough to know what's best for me? We read physics books. We think we're so smart. God invented it. He had the power and the knowledge to put the laws that we study into effect. Is he smart enough to really be able to figure those things out? Yes, he is. We need to have faith in him, faith of that little child. And I'm telling you, there are some people who got it right in the scriptures. In Mark 5, there's a woman, and we don't even really know what's going on. It says that she was hemorrhaging for 12 years. We don't know what that means. Somewhere she's bleeding, whether it's an internal bleed, maybe her arm was, I don't know, legs, something could have to do with menstruation or something. Nobody knows what that is. 12 years she's had an infirmity. She's had this thing that's going on, and all of a sudden she comes up, she hears about Jesus who comes into this town, and she says, maybe he can help me. Maybe he can help me. She listens, she goes through, yes, this man can help me. There's a crowd that's following Jesus because whenever Jesus would go out and do his public things, crowds just gathered. You want to get everybody out of their house and into a central place? Jesus shows up and people start coming. She works her way through this crowd. And I just have to picture, whatever the infirmity is, she's weak, she's moving through. This is a bad thing that she's experiencing. She's turning left, turning right. She is weaving through a crowd of people. That is not an easy task. And in her mind, this is what she has said. If I can just touch him, if I can just get close enough to grab one of his garments, then I will be well. And she gets close enough. She works her way all the way through the crowd. And you just picture this little arm coming out, grabbing a hold of Jesus' garment, letting go immediately out of fear. Jesus, all of a sudden, the scriptures say that he notices that power has left him. I love that. Because did he really notice? No. He knew what was going on. He's like, finally, she's made her way. He turns around and he addresses her. He looks for it. Someone has touched me. I felt it. She's afraid to even answer. But by the end of it, he tells her, your faith has made you well. You reached out, you stepped out, you worked your way through the crowd, you touched me, and guess what happened? Your life was changed. There's another story about this guy. He's a centurion. He's a Roman commander. And he has this servant who is sick. He's paralyzed, tormented, the scriptures actually say. There's physical stuff, there's spiritual stuff going on in the middle of this. This Roman commander comes up to Jesus, and this is what he says to Jesus. He says, I have this servant. Jesus knows that. He says, okay, no problem. I'll come with you, and we'll go help your servant. The commander says this, you don't have to do that. At this point, I know Jesus is like, all right, say it. Bring it on. Bring it on. The commander says, I command people. And I know what it's like to command people. And in my command, when I tell someone to go right, they go right. And when I tell them to go left, they go left. When I say go, they go. And come, they come. That's what it means to be in command. So he looks at Jesus and says, you don't have to go anywhere. If you will just say it, my servant will be healed. And Jesus is floored. Here's a Roman commander. The teachers of the law, the religious people don't even get it. But here's a Roman commander who actually gets it and says, your faith, this is huge. I've been looking for this. And you're right. Because of your faith, your servant is healed. And the scriptures say at that very moment, that servant sat up. Or the story of two blind men. I love this. Jesus is leaving Jericho and he's coming to this new place. And there's these two blind men. I don't know, I just picture them. They've got like a coffee cup or something. And, people come by and to give donations. And they've had this like conversation between each other. Yeah, I've heard that the healer's coming today. Yeah, he's coming. I know that he'll be here. We need to wait and listen for the crowds. And so the crowd actually comes in, pours in, and they're listening to what's going on, but they can't see where Jesus is. And so you get this sense that they go together and they run to the right and they go, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on us. But they're not in the right spot. They're over here and the crowd is over there. And so they get together and they decide to turn this way. And they walk over this way and they go, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on us. And it's so interesting because the crowd is kind of frustrated on them. The two blind guys are yelling in the back and we're here to talk to the teacher. But Jesus stops everything. He stops everything. Because the faith of these men, they were willing to yell out in the crowd and go here to go there. They didn't even know where they were going. They were willing to do anything to talk to Jesus. Because they knew Jesus could do something about their situation. And Jesus does. He speaks a word and they are healed because of it. And Jesus has this thing, and it's hard for us to wrap our minds around. When Jesus talks about God, he gives us a word that's really not given anywhere else. He uses this word. He says, you know what? We should address God. We should call him Abba. Abba means daddy. And that word is hard for us to use for God. It's hard for us. God is so big and powerful and all those things. It's hard for us to think about that. But Jesus is trying to tell us two things about him. Jesus is trying to tell us about the intimacy of relationship that we can have with God. He's also trying to tell us the heart of God. Because here's it. This is it, guys. I want you to know what God thinks about stories like this. From God's perspective, when that woman is making her way through the crowd, every duck, every turn, every dive, every time she gets in the way, she moves through, she asserts her will, she's moving her way to come forward. Every single movement that she makes, you know what Jesus heard? You know what God heard? Daddy, help me. Daddy, save me. Daddy, you have what I need. Please, Daddy, help me. He looked at that story, that centurion who's telling him, when I say go left, when I say go right, you know what God heard? Daddy, you can command things that I have no control over. Those two blind men, when they went left, when they went right, Jesus, son of David, you know what God heard? Daddy, save me. Help me. I want to see. I believe in you. You know what the heart of the Father did? He changed their lives. He changed their lives. You know what? Through this series, we're going to talk about nuts and bolts. We're going to talk about things that will help us in order to deepen our relationship with God. But I want you to catch this, because without this, all the tools are worthless. We need the heart that goes after God and says, Daddy, save me. Daddy, be with me. Daddy, I can't do this on my own. Daddy, for all things, I'm willing to believe in you, to trust in you. I'll do anything, Daddy, to be with you. And you know what the Father, the God of the universe, you know what Daddy will do for us? He'll save us. He'll be with us. There's no situation that Daddy can't fix. There's no circumstance that Daddy doesn't know how to get out of. All he wants, the only thing we have, is the faith to acknowledge him. He does everything else if we believe.